Okay, so in this video, we are going to be talking about one way that we can plot modes of transmission, and that is via simple dominance. Simple dominance. Simple dominance, move that out of the way, is a way that we can talk about one specific trait that has two different possibilities, two different versions of that gene that's causing that trait, and those two different versions of the same gene are called alleles. Two alleles. One of them is going to be dominant allele. That's going to be always be expressed with a capital letter. Just for our purposes here, we'll use capital A. And then one of them is going to be recessive. Recessive is going to be indicated with a lowercase letter. Generally, you want to keep the letters the same. So in this case, obviously, we're using A's. Capital A means dominant, means that is always going to shadow or hide the presence of a recessive allele. So recessive alleles are only going to be present if a dominant allele is not there. Okay, so now let's do an example. Let's take a dominant allele B and a recessive allele, also B, but you'll note it has to be lowercase. The dominant B, we'll just use an arbitrary, we'll use eye color. So a uppercase B is a dominant allele, which means it's always going to overshadow the recessive. For our purposes, we'll make the capital B mean blue eyes, and the lowercase or recessive allele is going to correspond to green eyes. Zoom that back just a smidge and put it in the corner. So capital B means blue eyes, lowercase b means green eyes. This means in a simple dominant scenario, again, we have two alleles, so we're always going to have two different letters. They can either be both capital, so we can have an instance where we have two capital B's. We call that homozygous dominant, because homo means same. So homozygous dominant because they are the same and they are both dominant alleles. The other option is we can have a big B and a little b. We call that heterozygous because hetero means different. So heterozygous allele, and the other possibility is to have two little b's. We call that homozygous, again because they're the same, except now we have to qualify that it's homozygous recessive. So for both homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive, it is important that you clarify not only that it's going to be two of the same letter, but they're either going to be two capital letters indicating a dominant trait or two lowercase letters indicating a recessive trait. So these are the three possible genotypes. We also have to keep in mind the possible phenotypes. So the genotype is the actual gene, the actual allele combination. The phenotype is the actual expression, the physical manifestation of this genotype. So each of these is going to be expressed in a different way. In this top one, the capital B, the homozygous dominant example, because we have two dominant traits, when we really only need one, we are going to present with blue eyes. Here in this middle example, we have a heterozygous individual. We have one dominant allele, and we only need one for that to be expressed. So this individual will also have blue eyes. In the third example, we have the homozygous recessive individual with two small b's. This is the only individual that is going to result with green eyes. So now let's do some examples utilizing our Punnett squares to estimate the possibility that certain traits are going to be inherited. So we make our Punnett square, which is a square that has 4 smaller squares. And this is going to allow us to estimate probability, again, that traits will be propagated on into offspring. So in this instance, we can illustrate here on the top, we have a heterozygous individual. Here on the bottom, we have their mating partner being also a heterozygous individual. Both of these people, remember, are going to present with blue eyes because they have at least one dominant allele. And if you have at least one dominant allele, it will be expressed. So how we do this Punnett square is we just take the one from the top that corresponds with the one on the side, and we write that in that square, giving us big B, or better terminology would be homozygous dominant. We do the same thing over here. We take a big B from the left and a little b from up top, giving us a heterozygous individual. For the bottom squares, we take the big B with a little b, giving us yet another heterozygous individual. And last but not least, we get the cool rainbow, giving our one and only homozygous recessive individual. And so this is the way that we can estimate the probability of the offspring of these two. In this case, we have 2 different heterozygous parents. So if we want to list the probability of specific genotypes with these 2 parents, again, we had the 3 different possibilities. We had homozygous dominant, we had heterozygous, and we had homozygous recessive. The probability of a homozygous dominant is we only have 1 square, so 1 out of 4 squares is capital B, so there is a 1 in 4 chance, or 25%. Big B, little b, a heterozygous, we have 2 squares that have that specific code. So that's 2 out of 4, which is 50%. Got a 50% chance of having an individual that is heterozygous. And last but not least, we have small b, homozygous. We do have a homozygous recessive individual possibility here, and that is 1 out of 4 squares, so that is yet again 25%. These calculations should always add up to 100, so if you don't get to 100, you probably did something wrong. In this case, we do indeed add up to 100, so we're good to go. So these are the possible genotypes that can relate from, again, these 2 individuals. Now, another question that we could ask ourselves is, what kind of phenotype might I get from this person? Again, the 2 possible phenotypes are either blue eyes or green eyes, because the phenotypes are what is actually going to be expressed. So while there's 3 possible genotypes, there's only 2 possible phenotypes. And so for this example, like any simple dominant scenario, if you have at least 1 capital B, which we have here, we have 2, and here we have 1, then that dominant trait will be expressed. So then our probability for having blue eyes means any offspring that will have at least 1 dominant trait is 75%. 75% will have chance to have blue eyes. And then green eyes, we have to be homozygous recessive. So that's only this last column, which gives us a 25% chance to have the phenotype of green eyes. This, again, needs to add up to 100%, just like any other ratio or percent has to do. All right, so let's do one more example in this same scenario. Draw us a new Punnett square. In this case, we're going to have, up top, we are going to have a homozygous dominant individual. So they have 2 dominant alleles. So their phenotype is going to be blue eyes. It has to be because they have not only 1, but they have 2 dominant alleles. They are going to mate with someone that has green eyes. The green eyes is the phenotype, and that implies that they have to be homozygous recessive. By the rules of the game that we have set up, the only possible way that you can have green eyes is to be homozygous recessive. So this gives us individuals where I won't draw all the lines again, so I don't clutter it too much, but to fill in our Punnett square, this gives us big B's as well as a little b in each and every square. So this makes it a little bit easier when we talk about our 3 possible genotypes. 3 possible genotypes, once again, were 2 big B's, which is homozygous dominant, big B, little b, which is heterozygous, and little b, which is homozygous recessive. In this case, a lot of our work is done for us because we can see that we don't see any homozygous dominant. Therefore, our percentage chance to be homozygous dominant is 0%. Skipping down to our homozygous recessive, which is our only way to get green eyes, we also don't have any of those. So our chance of being homozygous recessive is also 0%. And last but not least, we have our heterozygous, which, as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 possibilities of a heterozygous individual, which gives us 100%. That makes our phenotype analysis even easier because we have every single slot here has at least 1 capital B, which we indicated with our genotypic analysis here. So 100% of our offspring are genotypically going to have blue eyes. So I hope that clarified a little bit more for you guys, and I'll see you next time.